For our GCSE historic environment, we're looking at London during World War II. So we're going to take a look at the city very, very quickly. We're going to look at why it was such a key target for the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, and we will look at how the British government prepared for the bombing raids in terms of evacuation, blackout shelters and gas masks. So to start with, London was a key target for the German Air Force because it was the capital city. Obviously, it was at the heart of Britain and the British government. You have Parliament there, you have 10 Downing Street there, the royal family are located as well in the city. It is a huge industrial centre, transport hub. It has a big port and docklands in the East End, and German planes could quite easily fly across the Channel, follow the path of the River Thames, and get at London. And if London, of course, did fall, which the British government was very worried that it might, then perhaps the whole of the British Empire in its entirety would be at the mercy of Hitler and Nazi Germany. So the British government started to make preparations for German bombing raids even before war was declared on the 3rd of September 1939. Evacuation from London commenced on the 1st of September 1939. Over 1 million school children, mothers and teachers headed out of the city on special trains and buses to less dangerous areas in the countryside. Now, some evacuees were much welcomed in their reception areas. They found good homes and were looked after, staying there for the whole of the war. However, others were not quite so fortunate, and their experiences were hard. They found it difficult to adapt to their surroundings. And as the so-called phony war developed through the end of 1939 and into 1940, lots of evacuees returned home, particularly for Christmas. And by the time you start 1940 in January, most evacuees had returned to the City of London, and the government had to redouble their efforts to try and persuade parents to get their children from London to safer areas in the countryside again. Now, before the war, in July 1939, the government distributed a leaflet to the city, people in London, trying to urge them to enforce a blackout to make it hard for German planes if they were attacking London at night. So this is the start of the preparations for blackout. So old bed sheets and curtains were dyed black and were hung against windows to block lights from houses being seen. And you had ARP wardens, air raid precaution wardens. Their job was to enforce the blackout. So they would go around checking everybody was obeying the rules. They would also sound the air raid siren in case of an attack. They would direct the public to shelters and would also play a role with emergency services, helping the injured if there was an attack. During 1938, the year before the war started, over 1 million Anderson shelters were handed out by the government. These are the typical shelters you will have seen in pictures, built in back gardens, where earth was dug out of the ground and a hole was created with corrugated iron sheets curving over the top for a roof. And the shelter would help against blasts from bombs, also shrapnel, but also falling debris too. So the idea is that a family would be able to shelter there, and so if a bomb hit their house, they might survive because they would not be hit by falling debris from the house. Later on, 1941, you get Morrison shelters also being provided for people. These are the steel tables with wire netting around the sides, and again the idea there is to protect families, residents of houses from falling debris and bricks and masonry and collapsing buildings. On streets in London, you would find surface shelters, which were brick walls surrounded by sandbags, and again, if there was a bomb that hit nearby, that would offer some protection. Interestingly, the government were not keen on providing underground shelters for people, and the main reason for that is they didn't want people to stay down underground for the whole war. They wanted them above ground, helping the war effort. Finally, gas masks. There were worries over perhaps the potential for the Germans dropping bombs that release gas or chemicals. So therefore they issued gas masks to all adults in London in 1938, before the war had started. And then in 1939 they introduced smaller versions for children. And there were campaigns trying to urge people to carry their gas masks with them at all times. But again, when the phony war was around in the early part of the war and there were no attacks, people seemed to ignore that for reasons of convenience. However, preparations by the government did eventually prove to be important and to be hugely worthwhile, because in September 1940, the phony war came to an end and the Blitz of London finally began.